Who the hell ties a dog up in the middle of nowhere? The ranger's voice cracked like thunder through the pine-choked air of northern Montana. His boots crunched over the frosted ground as he pushed through the brush, fury rising in his chest. You want him to die out here, is that it? His name was Tobias Grant, a field biologist turned wildlife ranger after a traumatic encounter with poachers 5 years back. Nothing rattled him anymore, not wolf sightings, not black bear growls, not even a call about pumas near a rural trail. But this made his stomach turn. In a half-cleared grove just off Blacktail Ridge Trail, a German shepherd had been tied to an old fence post with barbed wire. His paws were raw, his ribs poked out beneath his matted coat, and his eyes told a story Tobias didn't want to imagine. They weren't scared. They were waiting for help, for someone. Tobias crouched down slowly, murmuring in a low voice, "Hey, buddy, I'm here now." But just as he reached for the wire, a rustle stopped him cold. Then another. Branches to his left swayed unnaturally, the sound too controlled, too deliberate. He turned his head and froze. 3 pumas, big ones, 2 females and a male, crouched on opposite ends of the clearing, watching. Their ears were low, tails twitching slightly, muscles coiled tight like a drawn bowstring. And in the middle of it all, the tied-up shepherd hadn't moved an inch. Tobias didn't dare stand. He knew better than to run, and besides, he wasn't going to leave the dog, not like this. He did a slow scan of the trees and realized what must have happened. The pumas had likely followed the dog's scent for hours, maybe days. Maybe they were drawn by his helplessness, maybe they sensed something else entirely. The dog finally moved, just his eyes. He didn't bark, didn't whimper. He stared straight at the alpha male, who had taken a step forward, and Tobias noticed something no training manual could explain. The puma didn't pounce. Instead, he paused, head tilted, not like a predator, but like he was confused or curious. And that's when Tobias saw it. The shepherd had a deep scar across his right eye. Old, jagged, not from barbed wire, not from human hands, from a claw. "Oh my God," Tobias whispered. "You've seen them before. There was a story here, a bigger one. Maybe this dog had belonged to someone living off the grid. Maybe he'd been raised near this forest. Maybe, just maybe, he'd survived a puma attack long ago, and in some strange twist of fate, found himself facing the same pack again. But this time, something was different." The puma turned away. One by one, they backed into the trees without a single sound. Tobias remained frozen, disbelief etched into every line of his face. The shepherd, still unmoving, watched them vanish like ghosts. Then, as if his job was finally done, he lay down. Not from fear, from peace. Tobias cut the barbed wire with shaking hands and wrapped the dog in his jacket, muttering softly, "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Back at the station, nobody believed him, not at first. Pumas don't spare prey. They don't hesitate like that. But Tobias didn't care. He didn't need them to understand. He only needed one thing now, to find out where this dog came from, and who left him behind, because no creature survives the puma encounters by chance. And whatever that shepherd had lived through, it wasn't over, not yet. The storm came that night, fast, sharp, and cold. As sleet pelted the roof of the ranger's cabin, Tobias knelt on a thick wool blanket, towel drying the shepherd with slow, methodical hands. The dog barely moved, except for the occasional flick of an ear. Not out of fear, he was simply too tired. His body had surrendered days ago. It was his spirit that had held on. Tobias had seen all kinds of broken dogs, neglected, starved, abused, but none like this. None who had stared down a pack of apex predators and simply waited, not growled, not cowered, just endured. There was something ancient in those eyes. Like he wasn't just a dog, but a witness to something far greater than anyone could guess. "Let's see who you are," Tobias murmured, brushing away the dirt around the shepherd's neck. His fingers froze. Beneath the matted fur and tangled rope, he found a collar, leather old, cracked from time but still attached. And there, almost invisible beneath the grime, was a small brass tag. He tilted it toward the lamp. The name was nearly worn off. Leo. Just 3 letters, but they struck something deep in Tobias. Leo. A name like that didn't just belong to a pet, it belonged to a fighter. Tobias reached for his radio, but stopped short. This didn't feel like something to report. Not yet. Not until he knew more. He wrapped Leo in an old quilt and placed him near the fireplace, then rummaged through the cupboard for what little chicken broth he had left. Leo's eyes followed him but remained half-closed, as though guarding energy for something unseen. That night, Tobias barely slept. Memories drifted through his mind, images of his old canine partner, Banner, who'd taken a bullet for him during a raid years ago. Dogs didn't just obey, they chose to stay loyal. And that kind of heart didn't come from training, it came from something deeper. Something unbreakable. By morning, Leo was sitting up, not quite steady but alert. Tobias placed a bowl of softened kibble and water in front of him. Leo didn't rush. He ate slow, polite, almost like he had been taught manners a long time ago, by someone who loved him once. Tobias watched him and said quietly, "Where did they take you?" Because it was obvious now Leo hadn't just been dumped. Someone had tied him out there, left him exposed in known puma territory. That wasn't abandonment, that was a setup. He ran Leo's tag through the local registry. Nothing. Not in Montana, not in Wyoming, not even across the border in Idaho. It was like Leo didn't exist, but Tobias didn't believe in ghosts. Somebody out there knew this dog, and someone wanted him dead. Later that day, Tobias took Leo back to the grove where he'd found him. Not to relive the horror, but to look for what he might have missed. Tracks still marked the frost-crusted earth. Big cat paws, flattened brush, and something else. Boot prints, not hiking boots, military grade. Soles, and they weren't Tobias's. He followed them deeper into the trees. Just a few yards in, he found something chilling, an empty vial, half buried beneath the roots. He picked it up. No label, no scent, but something about it made his stomach churn when he returned to the cabin. Leo was pacing now, restless, agitated. As Tobias approached, the dog suddenly lunged toward the fireplace, pawing at the baseboard. Tobias knelt beside him, pried the board loose and froze. Inside was a folded map. A trail of ink marked a path deep into the nearby forest. At the end, in bold red ink, someone had scrawled a single word: test. Tobias's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about a dog. Someone had brought Leo here for a reason. He'd been part of something bigger, something planned. And now Tobias had a choice. He could walk away, report Leo, turn him over to a shelter, forget the pumas, forget the map. Or he could follow the trail. Beside him, Leo sat tall now, still thin, still healing. But in his eyes, the fire had returned. He was ready, and Tobias knew then whatever test, Leo had survived. Whatever they had done to him wasn't finished, not yet, because Leo had escaped, and now, he remembered the snow melted slower, in the shadows of Black Hollow. And that's where Tobias and Leo found themselves the next morning, treading carefully over frozen leaves and undergrowth. The air was bitter with silence, broken only by Leo's soft, steady breathing, and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. Tobias kept the map folded in his jacket pocket, but the red ink trail was already burned into his memory. Whatever test meant, someone had left that word behind, like a whisper from the dark. They reached a weathered clearing around noon, where 2 rusted shipping containers sat half buried under piles of old pine branches and dirt. It looked abandoned. No fresh tracks, no lights, no movement. But Leo stiffened, his ears twitched, his body low, alert. Tobias trusted that more than his own instincts. Something had happened here recently. He approached the first container, rifle at his back, hand resting near his sidearm, not out of paranoia, but practice. He pushed open the door slowly, and what greeted him made his chest tighten inside. There were cages, 7 of them. One still had dried blood at the bottom. Another had claw marks on the walls. And there, clipped to a metal clipboard dangling from a nail, were files names, dates, breeds, notes, aggression response. Stage 2. Subject resisted sedation. Unpredictable with children. Tobias flipped through them until his hand shook. The final page read, Leo final phase rejection. Disposal approved. His throat tightened. It wasn't just that Leo had been discarded. He had been classified, trained, tested, pushed, and then thrown away like broken machinery. The pumas hadn't been random. They had been the final act in whatever program. This was Leo paced behind him, visibly anxious, as though remembering every second of the ordeal. His eyes locked onto the furthest corner of the container, where a small red rubber ball lay forgotten on the floor. Tobias reached for it, only to notice something else beneath it, a tiny microchip scanner, dusty but functional. He turned it on and scanned Leo's neck. A sharp beep, and a string of numbers lit up the screen. Access code, DGS-K9-11. That wasn't a local registration. That was military. Tobias backed out of the container, mind racing. He'd been military police once. He knew how deep covert programs ran. Some dogs were bred for war, for missions too dangerous for soldiers. But when those dogs failed or rebelled, they disappeared. The public never knew. They were called ghost units. Leo wasn't a stray. He was a ghost. And someone wanted him erased. That night, back at the cabin, Tobias pored over every scrap of data he had collected. He even tried accessing the code online. Nothing. It was scrubbed. The only lead he had was a shipping tag on the side of the second container. Property of Thornridge Tactical Labs, Colorado Division. Tobias hadn't heard that name in years, but he remembered the scandal unauthorized animal testing lawsuits, a whistleblower who vanished before he could testify. It had been buried quickly, expunged from records, and yet here it was again, staring him in the face through the haunted eyes of the shepherd now curled up beside the fire. Suddenly, Leo sat up, his ears turned toward the window, low growl humming in his throat. Tobias grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The woods were still too still. Even the wind seemed to stop then. He saw it, a figure, standing just beyond the edge of the trees. Watching Tobias raise the flashlight. But the man turned and disappeared into the dark, leaving behind only a set of fresh boot tracks leading deeper into the forest. The same pattern as before, military grade. This wasn't over. Tobias turned back to Leo. They know we found it, he whispered. They're coming. Leo didn't blink. He just stood, shoulders squared, and waited, as if he'd been preparing for this his whole life. The morning broke with an eerie calm. A soft layer of mist hung low over the forest floor, curling between tree trunks like ghostly fingers. Tobias stood at the edge of the clearing with Leo by his side, the shepherd's body tense, eyes locked on the place where the man had stood the night before. The fire in the cabin had long gone cold, but Tobias hadn't slept, neither had Leo. The tracks were still fresh. Heavy boots. No animal could have left those. Whoever it was had come close, then vanished without a sound. That meant they knew how to move in these woods, and worse, they weren't afraid. Tobias knew exactly the kind of men Thornridge Tactical Labs hired, ex-military trained to erase their own shadows. He once wore the same badge, but now he was on the wrong side of their silence. He packed fast. Maps, files, Leo's old collar, even the rusted microchip scanner, they all went into a weatherproof satchel. He didn't have a full plan, but he had a destination. Thornridge's old Colorado facility had been officially shut down, but locals whispered about black SUVs still rolling in at night. That was the only place Leo might find answers, or justice. But just as Tobias began to load his truck, Leo suddenly froze, ears forward, tail rigid. Then came a low, guttural growl. Tobias followed his gaze and his heart nearly stopped. 3 dark shapes emerged from the tree line, big, fluid, dead silent. Not pumas this time. Wolves this time. Wolves. Either these had tactical collars, black mesh vests, and strange numbers tattooed into the skin behind their ears. One of them bore a deep scar across its muzzle. Another had one blind eye, clouded white. These weren't just wolves. They were trained, altered. And they weren't alone. A voice rang out, crisp and cold. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you." Tobias turned slowly. The man stepping from the woods wore dark fatigue pants and a half-zipped jacket, with the Thornridge insignia half torn from the shoulder. He wasn't armed visibly, but Tobias knew better. This man was a handler. Leo stood protectively in front of Tobias, head low, teeth bared. "Step aside," the man said flatly, "or we let them finish what the pumas couldn't." Tobias didn't flinch. "He's not going back to your lab. He's not a weapon." The handler tilted his head, almost amused. "He was never a pet either. You think he saved that child out of kindness? He was programmed to respond to distress frequencies, trained to recognize infant cries. His loyalty isn't yours. It was engineered." Tobias's fists clenched. "And why is he still standing between you and me?" The handler didn't answer. Instead, he gave a subtle hand signal and the wolves advanced, but Leo didn't back down. He growled louder, barking sharply as if trying to warn them. The lead wolf hesitated. Something about Leo's posture, his stance, his defiance stirred confusion in the others. They began to circle, but slower now, less certain. Tobias took the chance. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the red rubber ball from the shipping container. He held it up, then threw it toward Leo. "Retrieve," he shouted. Leo broke into motion, not for the ball, but into the heart of the wolf. Packed. The sudden movement threw them off, and in the chaos, Tobias grabbed a flare gun from the back of his truck and fired it straight into the sky. The sound cracked through the air, followed by a burst of red smoke that would be visible for miles. The wolf scattered, and the handler hissed in fury. "You just made this public." Tobias didn't blink. "Good. Maybe now someone will ask why your ghost units keep showing up dead in the woods." The man took one last look at Leo now, standing unharmed beside the flare smoke, tail high, and vanished back into the trees. The wolves followed, melting into the forest like vapor. Tobias dropped to one knee beside Leo and held him tightly. "They won't stop," he whispered, "but neither will we." That night, they didn't go back to the cabin. They drove through back roads and border towns, through old mountain passes where cell towers died and maps turned to guesswork. Every stop was brief. Tobias only cared about one thing: no getting Leo to someone who could tell the truth, someone who still had a voice louder than Thornridge's silence. And somewhere along that winding, snow-covered path, Tobias realized something strange. Leo hadn't barked since the attack, but he didn't need to. Every time Tobias looked into those golden eyes, he knew this wasn't just a rescue. It was a war. And Leo wasn't the victim, he was the survivor. The first snowfall came earlier than expected. Thick flakes drifted from the sky like slow-falling ash, softening the jagged peaks that surrounded the narrow valley. Tobias kept one hand steady on the wheel as he navigated the winding road toward the old radio outpost in northern Montana. The place so remote it wasn't on any official Thornridge grid, but it was where the last whistleblower had fled. And if anyone had the courage to speak now, it would be her. Leo lay curled in the back seat, his breathing shallow but steady. The last encounter with the Thornridge handler had left invisible wounds, not physical, but emotional. Every time a twig snapped or a sudden sound echoed from the trees, Leo flinched. He wasn't just on edge. He was remembering. Tobias had seen that look before in soldiers who'd buried more than their comrades, and it broke something inside him to realize Leo was one of them. Not just a dog, not just a weapon. A being forced to remember pain that no creature should have been made to endure. The outpost came into view just before dusk, an old ranger station tucked between frostbitten pines. The radio tower behind it stood crooked but functional. Tobias parked beside the building and climbed. By brushing the snow from his jacket, he called Leo gently, and after a pause, the shepherd leapt down, eyes alert. They were greeted at the door by a woman in her late 40s, wearing a flannel coat and wool gloves, her hair tucked into a knit cap. Her name was Dr. Elise Moore. She didn't smile. She didn't reach for Leo. She simply opened the door wider. "I was wondering when he'd come back," she said. Tobias frowned. "You knew about Leo?" She nodded once. "I was one of the scientists assigned to his unit. Before I left, before I realized we were turning animals into ghosts." Inside, the station smelled like pine and old paper. A fire crackled in the stove, casting amber light across a stack of manila folders tied with red string. Tobias gently unwrapped Leo's blanket and let him rest near the warmth while Elise opened the files. She handed Tobias a page in operations sheet. Subject for 7B, Hybrid Shepherd, Enhanced Retrieval and Infant Detection Training. Leo but scribbled in the margin, faint in graphite, was a note. Failed behavioral reset. Shows signs of imprinting. "He imprinted on you," Elise said. "They tried to erase it several times, but it stayed." Tobias swallowed hard, blinking away the sudden weight in his eyes. "That's why he came back. That's why he saved the baby." Elise nodded. "They built him to follow code, but something broke through. Something they couldn't control, and they hate that." She reached into another drawer and pulled out a small device, a white chip reader with a cracked screen. She pressed it gently to Leo's neck. A soft beep followed, and the screen lit up, then froze. Tobias leaned over to read. "Command override active." Voice print registered. Tobias ran. His throat tightened. Leo hadn't just come back to him. He had chosen him. And the override meant one thing: Leo could no longer be reclaimed, redirected, or deactivated by unless they'll come for him, Tobias said. Elise nodded grimly. "They already are. That flare you fired didn't just call for help, it triggered a response protocol. You probably have ours." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Leo stirred, then rested his head on Tobias's foot. Tobias took a deep breath and made the decision he hadn't let himself consider until now. "Then we go public." "All of it." Elise hesitated. "You'll be hunted." "I already am." She pulled out a USB drive and dropped it into his palm. "It has everything. Files, footage, even the neural test logs. But it'll mean nothing if the world doesn't see him." Tobias looked down at Leo. He was no longer a ghost. He was proof, living, breathing, loving proof that no program could erase real loyalty. That even after everything done to him, Leo still chose to protect, still chose kindness, and Tobias wouldn't let that be buried. They left the outpost before dawn. Snow still fell as they descended the mountain, heading toward Denver, where Tobias had a contact at a local news station, a man who owed him more than a few favors. Elise would go dark again. She'd done her part. Leo sat upright in the back seat the entire way, head held high despite the tremor in his legs. And when they reached the edge of the city, something remarkable happened. A school bus drove past, slowly on the opposite lane, and from the back window a small girl with auburn hair locked eyes with Leo and gasped. Then she smiled. It was the child he had saved. She pressed her tiny hand to the glass, and Leo let out a soft, surprised bark. Not alert, not aggressive, but warm, familiar. The parents noticed. The bus slowed. The father's face turned pale, then shocked, then Dash softened. The world was already changing. 3 days later, the story aired. Footage of Leo's rescue, the records of his abuse, the classified documents leaked from Elise's files. People wept. Protesters stormed Thornridge's main office. Senators demanded investigations. And Leo, now referred to as the dog who defied the program, became a symbol of something far bigger than any lab could contain. Tobias didn't give interviews. He didn't need to. Leo's eyes told the world everything they needed to know. And every night, as the snow fell outside the safe house miles away from any city, Tobias would sit beside Leo and whisper the same promise: "They'll never touch you again. Not while I'm breathing." Because some bonds aren't made in labs. They're forged in fire, loyalty and love, and they can never be broken.